All right, well, this is for the test on February 16th. I see a little glare on the screen, so hopefully that's not a problem for you watching this. Most of this stuff should be in your notes. Yes, again, I want to focus on the four different shifts that we have here and the names for each of them. So increase in aggregate demand, should know it's expansion and demand pull inflation, results in higher price level, greater real GDP. Decrease in aggregate demand, recession or contraction, lower price level, less real GDP. Increase in aggregate supply, the best in both worlds, supply side economics or Reaganomics, lower price level, and an increase in real GDP. That's the best case scenario. And then the worst case scenario, decrease in aggregate supply, stagflation or cost push inflation. Okay. First of all, aggregate demand consists of these four things, right? Consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. And so anything that impacts those is going to shift aggregate demand. So consumption is what? Well, first of all, it's 70% of the economy. It's household purchases, okay? Everything from haircuts to dentist appointments to new cars. It has to be new things. Remember that the fifth category is not a part of GDP, right? So purchase of stocks and bonds is not a part of GDP. Purchase of used goods, not a part of GDP. Social security checks. If there's no product involved, that's not part of GDP, okay, or service. I think the trickiest one would be interest rates that a bank charges. That would be part of GDP because the interest rate is really a service that they're providing. But like if I give money to somebody, if I give a cash gift to somebody, that's not a part of GDP. If I pay somebody, a snow removal company to remove snow from my condo parking lot, that would be a part of GDP, provided they're claiming it on their taxes, et cetera. All right, so remember this important category, especially used goods, checks given by the government, purchase of stocks and bonds, not part of GDP. All right, investment is business purchases, new homes, and don't forget about inventories, okay? So the shoes at DSW, they're still part of GDP, right? They're new, they're produced, they just haven't been sold yet. So they go under investment until they're sold, okay? New homes, newly built residential places, condos, townhouses, etc. Business purchases, also new like office complexes. I talked about SoFi Stadium, right? That would be a huge investment, right? $1 billion facility, something like that. Government spending will focus primarily on military and infrastructure, but it could be anything from building public schools, libraries, maintaining streets, okay? Again, the government paying money out or stimulus payments or social security checks, that's not a part of GDP. If they're paying for a service, paying for the vaccines, paying for masks, et cetera, then would that be part of GDP? All right, and then net exports, just remember it's exports minus imports, okay? And know your determinants for all of these. So we've gone over this a lot, but consumption, we've got WEDIT, wealth, expectations, debt, interest rates, and taxes. Remember, we want debt, interest rates, and taxes to be low. For investment, we've got BITE, business taxes, interest rates, technology, and good expectations. Government spending is just simply the government deciding to spend or not to spend. And then net exports, we want a weak dollar and global prosperity, okay? Please remember the opposites of things that are good, right? So if a weak dollar is good for net exports, then a strong dollar is bad, right? Income taxes is for consumption, and then business taxes or corporate taxes is for investment. okay? All right, we've got our 4 different shifts, we got the names of them. You know, you're not gonna have to do any graphing. Having said that, you should do some graphing to help yourself out, to maybe work your way through some things. So let's say you're fuzzy on what happens to price level for a given event, right? Well, draw in the aggregate demand curve or aggregate supply shifting or whatever it might be. All right, so these are, again, all aggregate demand. The best one to happen to the economy is investment, because that's the only one that's gonna help also short-run aggregate supply. Infrastructure does help long-run aggregate supply, but not short-run aggregate supply. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what's good for aggregate supply or bad for it, right? So, you know, big key factor is cost of resources, cost of labor, oil, and commodities. If those are low, that's gonna help increase aggregate supply, okay? If those are high, which is what we're having now, we're gonna have stagflation, okay? Technology, always good, right? Okay. Anything that has to do with productivity, okay? And if I talk about technology as specifically helping production, then that I'm implying is an aggregate supply issue more than an aggregate demand issue. Okay, so if I say new technology allows for greater production of wheat, okay, then I'm specifically saying I'm focusing on aggregate supply. Government regulations are bad. Donald Trump loosened a lot of regulations, especially on like land in Alaska, that kind of stuff. That's supply side policies, right? Loosening regulations. Lower business taxes. Okay, lower business taxes helps, you know, companies to spend more money, hire more workers, etc. You know, so this aggregate supply is about productivity. Anything that's pro-business, okay, is gonna help aggregate supply. Anything that businesses don't like or that inhibits them, like regulations or higher taxes, is bad. Natural disasters, right? You know, anything from snowstorms to hurricanes to drought. You know, an economic natural disaster doesn't equate with, you know, we wouldn't consider a huge snowstorm, which results in very few, you know, casualties, as a mega natural disaster like Hurricane Katrina, but it can really inhibit, if you have a prolonged month of tons of snow, it can really slow things down, okay? All right, so keep in mind this graph in all aspects of it, okay? Remember that real GDP is our primary measure for the economy. It's not the only measure, but if I ask what's the primary measure, it is real GDP, okay? How do we get real GDP? Well, real GDP is nominal GDP divided by the deflator. So you may need a calculator for this, okay? So let's say, let me turn the light on. We'll get through this video, let's turn off the next one. Let's say nominal GDP is 20 trillion, and the deflator is 1.2, okay? Then 20 divided by 1.2, I don't know what that is. It's something, okay? So that's how I calculate it. I think it's something like 16 or 17, something like that, okay? And it gives us the value. And this is called the deflator because what's gonna happen is, essentially, as long as this number is greater than 1, it's gonna make our GDP smaller, okay? If we go deep into the past and the price index is something like 72, well, that converts to 0.72. Well, 0.72 used in this equation is gonna actually make the real GDP increase quite substantially, okay? All right, but usually we're talking about a price index, and we're usually comparing to last year, so there's usually a step up in the price index, okay? You should know all these things, okay? It doesn't mean that you do, but this is a nice foundation to get started. And remember, if the graph moves to the right, that's good. And if the graph moves to the left, that's bad, okay? So stagflation, cost push inflation, bad. Recession or contraction, bad. Supply side economics or Reaganomics, good. Expansion or demand pull inflation, good. Yes, there is some inflation, but like I always say, you'd rather have a job and pay a little bit more than be unemployed and pay less. Okay, this is video 1 of what will probably be 2 videos for the exam.